All right, good morning, everybody. I think we're ready to get started. This is the October meeting of the task force. Before we start, I guess, real quick, let's take the roll. We can do that, and then we can.
Senator Harper Angel. Senator Higdon.
Here by video.
Senator McDaniel.
Here.
Representative Decker.
Present.
Representative Huff.
Here.
Representative Stevenson. Here. Co-Chair Stivers. Chair McCoy.
Here. Before we start, we've got a lot of guests in the audience. I want to recognize my mayor, my independent school board the superintendent, candidates that are running for judge executive. I don't know if there's anybody else out there. And then Representative Huff, you wanted to introduce some guests, please.
I'd like to recognize Jerry Summers and his leadership team, Kay and Keith, Shepherdsville Mayor Curtis Hockenberry, Mount Washington Mayor Barry Armstrong, Lebanon Junction Mayor Larry Dangerfield, Sheriff's Office Manager Justin Odie, Southeast Fire Chief Eric Butler and his command staff, Southeast Fire Board Chair David Jerkins, Zonton Fire Chief Kevin Moulton, EMA Director Justin Warren and his command staff, and finally EMS Director Eric Cook. I'd like to welcome you all here today.
Representative Decker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have my county judge want to say welcome. He's, I think, been at every one of these meetings. Dan Ison, Deputy County Judge John Park is here. Sheriff Mark Moore, I think he's also been at every single session. We have someone here from the Shelby County Public School System. Yes, there you are. And we also, my fire chief, one of them, called me last night. He's not here, but he said he's represented by all the fire chiefs who are here. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here.
All right, before we start, we need to approve the minutes from last meeting. Do we have a motion? We have a motion and a second. Representative Huff, all in favor? Oh, so, the motion passes. Senator Higdon, I'm sorry, I just saw your hand raised on the screen. Go ahead, sir. Floor's yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not there as that's evident, but I'm sure in the audience, which I can't see, there large Marion and Nelson County delegation, and I want to just thank them for being in attendance today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. All right, the agenda was pretty open. You know, we've spent all summer talking about the issue, trying to get our hands around the magnitude of it. I've asked everybody to help us be creative. You know, is there a solution that holds our locals harmless and yet doesn't cause a barrier to entry to new growth in what has got to be one of our largest signature industries driving tourism in all of our counties? So a lot of folks have signed up to talk. Staff and I have looked at it. It looks like we can break you down into some categories. So I'm going to ask the school folks to come up first. I think we've got Henry County Public Schools. I had another one. Franklin County Schools, and any other school person that wants to come to the table. And look, we've had testimony. So if we could today, what I would love is if you've got something new to bring to the conversation, fantastic. But more importantly, give me some ideas. And you know, you've all probably sat through these seminars and things where you brainstorm and you write it on the board and we do word clouds or whatever. That's kind of what I'm hoping we do, is come up with some ideas. And even if they're bad, let's throw them on the table and say, this is an idea and it's bad and here's why, and this is the good, or, you know, whatever. So with that, folks at the table, introduce yourself. Make sure the green button is pushed. And if you can talk loud in the microphone.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jim Masters. I am the superintendent of Henry County Public Schools.
And my name is Mark Kopp. I'm the superintendent of Franklin County Schools here in Frankfort.
Chris Brady, superintendent of Marion County Schools.
Great. Welcome, gentlemen. Take it away.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll start. I want to say thank you for hearing our voices as educators. We really do appreciate it. And I'll speak specifically about Franklin County Schools. We are obviously huge fans of the bourbon industry. The bourbon industry has been very good for our community, for our county, for our school system, to the tune of about $2.9 million in tax revenue just for this past year. And that's obviously a significant source of revenue that comes into our district that provides opportunities for our students and our staff. And we do not want to see that go away. And we're more than willing to listen to any suggestions, like you mentioned, Representative McCoy. We want to come to the table as partners. We want to collaborate with the bourbon industry. We have been good partners to our community and good partners to the education system in that for 5 of the last 6 years, our school district has taken the 4%. We have done what we can do at the local level to increase our revenues to provide opportunities for students. In 2008, the funding matrix for how school districts was funded in Franklin County specifically, 56% of our funding in 2008 came from the state and 44% came from the local taxation. That is completely flip-flopped. So here in 2021, 56% of the revenue came from the local and 44% came from the state. So whereas our state revenues have been continually decreasing, SEEK has not kept up with the rate of inflation. Our local taxation, we have more than done our part to provide those opportunities. And so what I would please ask you all to consider is $2.9 million to a school district of our size is significant. We have been able over the last 6 years to provide 5 2% raises. We have taken our teacher pay from 90th in the state to 28th in the state in Franklin County schools. And that's been as a result of working with the revenues that we have. If those revenues go away, we're gonna lose a significant amount of ground, and we're not going to be able to continue pushing forward with education. So I please ask you to consider those things, and we're more than willing to work with you all on a solution.
Thank you, Mr. Kopp. Quick question for you: the flip-flop from the 44 to 60, vice versa. Any idea how much of that is attributable to growth in this barrel tax, which, for you being in Franklin County, you've got some of the more expensive bourbon in the world sitting right here.
Yes, we do. And Buffalo Trace is currently undergoing a $1.2 billion expansion. They're doing very well, and that's been fantastic for us. 4 years ago, that $2.9 million was $1.2 million. So over the last 4 years, we have increased from 1.2 to 2.9 million. It's been a significant increase, and it's been extremely helpful for a district that's been so underfunded for several years.
Great, thank you.
And I would like to just echo the sentiments that Mr. Kopp has shared with you today. I'm going into my first full year as superintendent of Henry County Public Schools, and my community has been so gracious to invite Angels Envy to come on board and be a part of our community. That represents a tremendous impact potential for my school district. And please understand when I say this, I mean it with all humility. It could be a game changer for me as a superintendent in terms of providing supports, state-of-the-art facilities for my students. For example, by the year 2030, we'll receive $1.2 million. Folks, I have buildings, and they're wonderful. They're filled with the most amazing kids, the most amazing staff in the world. But I've got a building that was built in 1955, 1962, and one in 1902, and I lack the bonding capacity to replace those buildings. And time is coming where it needs to be replaced. We all agree education is the future, not just to the state of Kentucky, but for our country as well. We need the bourbon industry to provide the supports and financial backing that we need to create not just facilities, but also create a learning environment that is full of materials and resources for our staff and our students in order to be successful. And I would like to leave one point. I do not envy you in trying to make the decisions that you're wanting to make, because you represent not just the citizens of this great state, but you also wish for all our businesses to thrive and flourish. But I would like to point out something. Let's move forward into the future. And for example, my colleague in Franklin County, let's say, for example, you have $2 million coming from the bourbon industry that goes into that pool of tax money that you're collecting, and now it's removed because the bourbon barrel tax is taken away. That means our taxpayers have to pick up the tab on that, because we're going to receive the compensating rate the following year. So please be considerate of that as well. Last but not least, I'll say this. I think that the bourbon industry, and we've been talking with Angels Envy in Henry County, they're wanting to partner with the schools. It's not just about the money. It's also looking at what are future careers, high demand, high wage jobs that our students could be looking forward to going into. Can they partner with us in those areas? Yes, they can. So it's more than just about revenue. It's about building relationship to give a very bright future for our students. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. President Stivers has a question.
I want to go through this, and Mr. Masters, I want to understand, you all do not have any storage or distillation going on in Henry County yet?
We do at the time. We do have bourbon warehouses that are housing barrels. Last year, I think we started out with $54,000 in revenue. That will be jumping up significantly going into this coming school year and the following school years. And my colleague, County Judge Executive John Logan Brent, would be able to provide you with more specific numbers.
The question I have then, understanding what your dynamic is to both the superintendents of Franklin County and Henry County, is I'm understanding and various things, and I'll tell you this from my perspective. I know what it's like to lose an industry, and Senator McDaniel's here and others. When we lost the coal industry, we lost jobs, we lost students, we lost property tax base. I think there was 18 school systems. Is that right, Chris? That we had to supplement because they did not have the revenues coming in. Mm-hmm. So I know exactly what you're talking about, but I also understand this. I've had conversations with all different parties from all over the state. And it's kind of interesting because I read the Franklin County newspapers and the Henry County newspapers. There is quite a bit of consternation about Peaks Mill and other places in Henry County. I think one of our more noted agrarians has talked about how to stop expansion in Henry County. So I had numerous counties reach out to me saying, and I know I had some people from the industry reach out to me saying, do you know property in eastern Kentucky that would be willing to accept us, because we know of 2 counties that are not very accepting. So that could potentially hurt your revenue base. And so I just put that out to say, when you look at this, if a company's bought out, they may change their business model, which happens often, and things get moved. Industry, like in the coal industry, goes down and hits cycles. We were generating over $325 million in severance tax alone. That's not the income tax, the corporate tax, or anything else, the sales tax, or, which comes back to the contacts I've had from various counties, not just in my area in eastern Kentucky, but across the state that says, look, if they want to store bourbon, we'll create an industrial park of rick houses, and we'll gladly welcome them here. Or I approached one company, and they would not respond, because all it has to do is distill, hit the barrel, stay here for 1 year, 1 day, and Indiana is a short distance away. So no new construction, no new expansion, but the increase of the tax base doesn't happen here. It happens in Indiana.
Yep.
Now, your all's thoughts on that?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll address that, Dr. Masters. Thank you for those comments, Senator Stivers. You're 100% right in terms of that's something that could happen. And one of the things I want you all to know is that the school system, we don't have a lot of ability to lobby our public in terms of what a certain group of homeowners believe, but we are in favor of growth. I've been preaching growth since I came to the school district 6 years ago. There's no reason why Franklin County should not grow at the rate of our other counties. So we're going to do everything in our power to promote that growth as much as we can. But we are talking about possibilities, things that could happen. If you all, get rid of this tax, it's not a possibility. It's a $2.9 million is gone very quickly. So for us, and the other thing you have to understand from our perspective, we already lose out a significant amount of revenue in Franklin County due to state-owned property. And we have been working for years trying to get some offset from the legislature to help us, because we can't tax where AOC happens to have their building, where that used to be a Home Depot that brought in 6 figures in tax revenue. So again, anytime that we face a threat of revenue going away, we're going to do everything that we can to advocate for that revenue.
And if I can, Mr. Chair, I think what's happened since I've been around so long, most people in Franklin County now know that I own a house and have owned a house here since 2004. So I get all types of visitors at my house. It's kind of hard to avoid sometimes, but I've heard from both that and people coming to me about these issues about loss of property value, which I'm very well aware of that when Eastern Kentucky is substantially owned by the Daniel Boone National Forest. But I caution everyone about thinking this is always going to be a goose laying golden eggs, because industries don't always exist in the shape, fashion, and form you currently see them in.
Senator McDaniel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. We talked about this as an exceptionally complex issue, but I want to go through a couple of things here and ask you guys to respond. Henry County, you will be the sole outlier in what I have to say today, which is as a district who is new to having distilled bourbon barrels stored in your district. You were at, looks like, 800,000 last year, and you're at 7.5 million this year. But yet you're the only county in the Commonwealth with stored barrels whose tangible property tax rate actually declined. If you look at the 10-year trend, I want to go through a couple counties. It's just odd that you guys ended up here today. In Marion County, in 10 years, you've gone from $63 million to $277 million in distilled spirits stored there. But yet your tax rate's gone from 53.8 to 58.1. In Franklin, we've gone from, let's see here, I lost my place just a little bit. I had it in here. Forgive me. Okay, from Franklin, we went from 120 million to 416 million, and from 62 cents to 70 cents for the tangible property tax rate. And if I can go down through Bardstown from 150 million to 250 million, but from 72 to 85 on the rate. A Bullitt from 245 to 354, on and on. Everyone has seen a substantial increase in the value of spirits taxed, right? But yet everybody has continued to take an increase on the tangible property tax rate that is applied to these barrels. So how is that fundamentally fair to industry when you're going to get more money because they have more stored, but yet the rate on them continues to go up?
Very good question. I can also state that for the last 2 years, our tax rate was at 71.8, and we have actually lowered that rate each of the last 2 years. Last year to 71.3 and this year to 70.8. It is very much due to the figures and the calculations that we receive from the Kentucky Department of Education. When we're asked to do everything that we can at the local level, that means taking the 4% increase in revenue, and we have done that in 5 of the last 6 years, again, to try to offset that lack of funding that we have received from the state. Again, when you go from 56% funding to 44% funding over a 10-year period, you have to be able to provide opportunities. The cost of textbooks doesn't go down. The cost of teacher salaries does not decrease. Those things go up. So local school districts are forced to take that increase in revenue. And thankfully, the last 2 years in Franklin County, our revenues have increased. So when we've taken an increase in revenue, we've been able to decrease the tax that we collect. But those are all valid questions and concerns. And maybe we wouldn't be as loud here advocating for that bourbon barrel tax if we had received proper and sustained funding that kept up with inflation over the last 15 years.
But I find it interesting. I've heard this. It's kind of interesting that in the last 4 years, all of a sudden, the education community's been concerned with the inflationary effects, while under the previous administration, before Governor Bevin came in, no one ever came in complaining about not keeping up with inflation. I never heard that complaint. It seemed to be a fairly partisan complaint. It seems to be fairly recent. It seems to be something that people want to continue to place blame upon. And so, to expect this industry to particularly sustain when small things were happening that there were objections to, I simply did not hear those, frankly, until Matt Bevin became governor of the Commonwealth. And so I find it problematic now that you guys find yourself in a bad spot. And listen, a $2 million loss is a big deal. I get it, right? But to come in here and lecture the General Assembly now when we didn't hear it for that whole administration, I find to be troubling in context.
Definitely not lecturing, just providing information. And I can state that from the day that I've been superintendent, we've looked very carefully at the economic index and the facts that we've been forced to deal with. And I've never once at any point considered politics as part of this.
Great. Thank you for that. Before we get to the last question, do you have some comments you want to add?
Yes, I would just echo my previous superintendent and what he said. I'm a first-year superintendent, so I can't speak to leaders before me, but I do know this. Marion County receives approximately $1.8 million in distilled spirits tax. I do know that our board has, in the last several years, taken the 4% option. For example, this year, that generates a local increase effort of approximately $660,000, while the state decrease in SEEK and the way it works was approximately $400,000. So what I say to that is we have very limited options in increasing funding for the district. As costs continue to increase, there's only so many options that we can take. So, the way we look at this is that it's a partnership, and we're very proud of our industry in Marion County, Maker's Mark, Diageo, and others, and we view them as a partner. And, they need us to provide the very best product that we can do. And as a result, we need their partnership. So and I would add one final thing. In 2008, Marion County was 29% local effort, 71% state. This year, we're about 50-50, which, could, like the others, be due to the unprecedented growth, partly due to the bourbon industry.
Representative Decker.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I commend the leadership of this task force for all the data that you've provided, all the information. Every single meeting added a layer of information that we needed. And I truly believe Eric Kennedy gave some of the best testimony about the complexity of the tax structure and the different layers, and you've spoken about that today. And to come up with the creative solutions that co-chairman McCoy has asked us to do, there's just a few more pieces that I need to know. And you spoke today about the loss of revenue when a building in an industry sells its building to a state agency.
Yes.
Do you know that for the IRBs, when an industry is removed from the property tax, do you know what the loss is for this industry at any level, at any year in your county?
I do not, but I could get that information to you.
That would be,
Representative.
I would like to know what in overall the industry, how that plays out if they did not have the IRBs and were paying property tax in the counties as related to this bourbon barrel tax. I appreciate your answer. Does anybody have an answer to that in your counties? Okay.
And Representative Decker, you may recall a couple of meetings ago was one of the pieces of information we asked for the counties to bring us the property tax revenue that they forewent in the IRB process. To my knowledge, I don't know if any staff member or anybody's gotten it. I have not seen that info. Would still love to see that information. Okay, fellas, I appreciate it. Before you
very
leave,
much.
do you got an idea? That's what this meeting's about. I mean, I hope you all understand. We genuinely, from the bottom of our hearts, appreciate, understand, comprehend. We're with you. The goal is, how can we do this and not hurt you? I get the hurt part. I need help on the other part. So tell me your solutions.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
I agree. And I will say this. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about the democratic process. And it's what we teach our students. I mean, we're able to sit here together and try to work out a solution. I understand that you have to balance what is best for students, what's best for our citizens, what's best for our industries. And that's a very difficult thing to do. And often you're faced with decisions that you probably feel like there's no way to win. It's a catch-22. Our purpose was just to state that, remind that we're all in this together. We're all here to support, in our case, students, because that's our industry and what we can do to be best for them, which is the revenue. Now, in terms of solutions, I wish I did have a very specific solution to you. I think it's very difficult to duplicate the type of revenue and the type of increase in revenue that we could potentially receive through the bourbon industry. But at this time, no, I don't have a solution.
I'll be glad to offer. I'm not a fan of problem admiring. I say it all the time in my job. Let's not admire the problem. Let's try to find a way to solve the problem. Outside of just eliminating the bourbon barrel tax, is there any way that we could look at a graduated elimination of that, or a reduction in the amount of that tax, where we could still look for ways to be made whole by the legislature through that advanced SEEK formula, but while we could still reduce the burden on the bourbon industry, but it maybe wouldn't be all at once. It would be something where we could then work together to find ways. If we were hit with this immediately, like my colleague Dr. Master says, the compensating rate for Henry County, for instance, if they were receiving this much money and then that money goes away, for us as a district, $2.9 million is a huge portion of what we receive. And we would have to raise taxes, to Senator McDaniel's his statement earlier. We would have to raise that tax rate from 70.8 significantly to offset that increase. So is there a way in which we can lower the tax? Is there a way in which we can graduate it over time? Again,
and you're dead on. Those are the kinds of things I wanted to hear, and I wanted to hear, okay, what's a proposal to do that, and what's the good and the bad and the ugly if we did that? Right. I really hope you'll continue to think, but I hope the rest of the folks coming after you have got something to maybe throw out there. President Stivers has a question.
Mr. Masters, just one quick question to understand your dynamics. You currently have how many barrels in Henry County?
I'll have to refer to County Judge Executive John Logan Brent on the number sign. He has that data with me. I don't have it.
But you think a few thousand?
Yes. About a $250,000.
250,000. Right. And then you're expected at full implementation to go to what, and how fast would you hit that point?
1.8 million barrels in 2035.
1.8 million in 2035. Okay.
Anything else?
That's it.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Let's do next up, if we kind of look at the groupings, we've got some county judges and other county, like economic development folks. So let's have the Marion County Economic Development, Marion County Judge Executive, Henry County Judge Executive, Bullitt County Judge Executive, and Shelby County Judge Executive, if there's enough seats up there. And folks, we've heard a lot of testimony from you already. I'm would hope we don't have to replow ground, and Jerry, there's a chair on the other side too, or pull one up there. Either one you want. It doesn't matter.
I'll just take Corey if you don't mind.
So if you guys would, please introduce yourself for the record, and I'll pose the first question. What's your idea?
I'll introduce myself first. Good morning. I'm Brooklyn Leap, the Executive Director of Economic Development in Marion County.
I'm David Daugherty, the Marion County Judge Executive. Jerry Summers, Judge Executive of Bullitt County.
John Lovett Brand, Henry County Judge Executive.
Dan Eisen, Shelby County Judge Executive.
Oh, he's running for somebody's job. Hold on now. All right, guys, you all have been up here before. You've had lots of input and comment. Tell me you've got at least an idea.
Well, if I may speak, Mr. Chairman, one of the things I would like is your idea. Let's find a solution. One of the solutions can be looking at a sunset. What are we going to look at 25 years down the road?
I don't mean to interrupt you. We're not hearing you on the record. Could you maybe pull it closer and make sure it's on? It's just not coming through. Yeah.
Can you hear me all right now?
Green light needs to be on.
Green light's on?
Green light's on. There we go.
There you go.
There we go. We got it. One of the things I would like to look at is sunsetting this tax 25, 30 years down the road. What I have spent my entire business career as a lobbyist for big tobacco. I've worked in alcohol with Bullitt. I was their state lobbyist for 16 years. I understand that side of the business. I understand my side as county judge executive. I have had to work through when the pension came down, and I had to find an extra $1 million for our shortfall that we were given. We found that $1 million. When big alcohol came into Shelby County, I was a lobbyist that worked, and I kid with Bullitt quite often that had I known I would be county judge, you would not have gotten the tax deal that you got when you came into this county. But we work with them. Bullitt is a great corporate citizen. I have 2 new distilleries coming into Shelby County, over $200 million investment in our county. The business of bourbon is not going out of business. It's growing its business, and it has done that. But many years ago, Bill Samuels sat before the legislative body and said, when we were working on tax deals, we, the bourbon industry, will never harm the education system of Kentucky. I'm approaching over $1 million for our school system in Shelby County. When these new operations get up and operational, we'll push over $2 million for our school system. We can't continue to harm our school system. I can make up the shortfall if it goes to the library, if it goes to other taxing districts that are a part of it. But our fire departments and our education system cannot be harmed by this. But I would like and be more than willing to sit down with the industry and let's look at a sunset 25, 30 years down the road. Where can we go with this? We make the concessions when we bring these new industries in. No property tax. We share in the occupational revenue. Big bourbon doesn't bring big jobs. We can run Bullitt Distillery on probably 50, 70 people. It's not the occupation. It's that barrel tax that was so important. Any contract with any new distillery coming into Shelby County says any concessions will go away if the barrel tax goes away. I don't know that any other county has done that, but that's big bourbon. You brought something to the table, and it was that barrel tax. That's why we wanted you in Shelby County. It helped our education system. I'm a negotiator. I've always negotiated. It's not a matter of yay or nay. It's what can we find in the middle. Representative Decker has been outstanding in working with my office, working with our education system, in working to find these solutions. I can't compliment the representative enough for the job she does in working with Shelby County. Many of you have been given barrel slats from the bourbon industry. I ask you not to use that slat to spank us. Use it to let us grow. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Go ahead. Got an idea for me? I heard sun, so that's the first idea on the table. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. If you'll humor me about 2 minutes, I'll get to one of the solutions, okay? And I want to address Senator Stivers. You were asking about some numbers, and I want to throw those out if I could. So I'm from Henry County, Kentucky. Our economic engine was Burley Tobacco for decades. We have 5 small industries there, all employing less than 100 folks. The global economy took out the tobacco industry, and it took out most of my little mom and pop 100 jobs or less industry. First 16 years as judge executive, I had zero good there was no good economic news first 16 years. 2018, Peerless Distillery, Angel's Envy Distillery, and Rabbit Hole Distillery all came in the same year. It was an election year. It was a nice gift for me that year. A lot happening. People were excited. Rabbit Hole wanted to build warehousing, a tasting room, and a distillery. They picked a poor piece of ground next to a subdivision. The people rose up, fought that, and ended up suing them. Planning and zoning passed that. The county did our part to endorse that project. In order to save that, we gave them at cost $4,000 an acre, 40 acres in our county-owned industrial park, just for warehousing only. They said the distillery's off the table, the tasting room, we may do something out there, but we've got to have a place to store this bourbon because the distillery now is in downtown Louisville. We need warehousing. Fiscal court made a decision to do that based upon the benefit of the barrel tax that we were supposed to get. So I know there was a lot. I think it's important to make that comment because we've talked a lot about IRBs and things. We didn't give an IRB. We just sold this land at $4,000 an acre that we had hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal grants, state grants, tobacco settlement dollars to put the infrastructure in, and county tax dollars. That's the first thing I want to say. Second thing, also Angel's Envy came that year in 2018, and in the planning and zoning meeting, in a public meeting, they handed out, this was part of their slide presentation, and I've passed that out. Hopefully you all will get that. But before a room full of people, we had to have it at our school because it was so largely attended. They said, we estimate that you all will receive $855,000 in barrel tax revenue. So part of our decision for welcoming them in was based on that barrel tax revenue. And I want to get to the numbers point for you. Very fresh, 3 nights ago, fiscal court just heard a rezoning request from Angel's Envy Distillery and passed it. 1,000 acres, 25 new 58,000 barrel warehouses. Now I want to do that math. 25 warehouses times 58,000 barrels is 1,450,000 barrels. All the distilleries in Henry County start at $50 a fifth. $50 a fifth times 240 fifths in a barrel equals $12,000 per barrel. $12,000 per barrel times 1,450,000. I've been using the same adding machine for 20 years for my budgets, and I had to get down with my magnifying glass and look at the zeros. $17,400,000,000. Our tax on $17,400,000,000 is a little bit over $7 million. Quite frankly, I don't see that there needs to be a solution. That is such a pittance on $17,400,000,000, and we're going to collect $7 million in barrel tax. But to honor your request, I will throw out a starting point. The sunset is problematic whichever way you go. If you put a 5-year sunset in, then all these promises that we were made, we don't get anything for it because our barrels are just coming online in 5 years. And then if you put in 30 years, 20 years, or 30 years, I like that better, but probably kicking the can down the road. What we've heard the industry say, what you all said is, we're worried folks are going to go someplace else, the startups. Well, what if you exempted the first 10,000 barrels? And that doesn't sound like a lot, but watch these numbers with me. At $25 a fifth, so not the $50 a fifth, but at $25 a fifth, that's $6,000 a barrel. 1,000 barrels will be $6 million. 10,000 barrels will be $60 million. That's quite a bit of capital. I would think once somebody got to $60 million in retail capital, that it probably wouldn't hurt them to pay a few $100,000 in barrel tax at that point. So I would think that would really help all those mom and pop startups, all those type of folks get started. And that would be something that I'd like to throw out as a solution. But we have no other options. We're one of 15 counties in the state of Kentucky that does not have an occupational tax, does not have an insurance premium tax, and we're becoming a bedroom community more and more, and we don't have a way to pay for the services. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and I appreciate you throwing an idea. That's interesting. We'll just keep going across the table. Go ahead.
Yes, again, thank you for the opportunity to come before you all. I think this is my first time having a seat at the table during this. I've been attending the meetings. Again, I'm the Economic Development Director in Marion County. Just a little bit about my background. I was formerly a senior project manager at the Cabinet for Economic Development under the Governor Bevin administration, worked a year for the Beshear administration before taking this role in Marion County. And I just want to point out that I probably have more in common with you all than not. Typically, I would be all about, creating a business-friendly environment, doing whatever it takes to cut red tape and make it easier to do business here in Kentucky, until I saw what this could potentially do to us at the local level and how detrimental it would be to my county by taking this tax away. So I hope to provide just a little bit of a different perspective from the economic development side of things today. I don't necessarily feel like Marion County has had a true seat at the table until today, so I greatly appreciate that, and I hope you'll kind of allow us the opportunity for that today. If we would have had a seat at the table and had an opportunity to have a rebuttal, maybe a little bit towards some presentations that have been given, particularly by the Kentucky Distillers Association, when we're talking about bourbon in Kentucky, which, by the way, I'm a huge fan of, very much so. Wish I had one with me right now. Could be helpful. We jumped from slide to slide talking, or they jumped from slide to slide talking about bourbon, and then all of a sudden would say something that I found to be a little misleading, saying that other states had so many other distilleries in them outside of Kentucky that we were kind of falling behind on that. And I would have a rebuttal to that to say, are we still talking about bourbon? Are we still talking about the Bourbon Trail? Are we talking about other spirits that are distilled in other states? Vodkas, tonics, all dozens of other spirits. And so I think there were some things that were very misleading. From a local economic development perspective, we've had 3 distilleries interested in Marion County within the last 2 months, 2 of those being international companies that don't already have a presence here in the United States or in Kentucky that are looking to grow their American whiskey footprint. And they do not want to do that anywhere outside of Kentucky. They want it to be here. So just as a reminder, I think these numbers may have been discussed already, but I want to bring up Kentucky bourbon projects since 2015, and I'm just going to name off a few that have happened in counties. Nelson County, $755 million of investment over 27 projects. This does not include numbers from 2022, so this is from 2015 to 2021. Franklin County here in Frankfort, $361 million of investment. Jefferson County, $171 million of investment. My county, Marion County, $655 million invested since 2015. I don't believe that the bourbon industry is slowing down. And I just want to talk about the law that we've been talking about that was passed in 2014 by you all. The law was passed without involving our local officials. In fact, I have our county judge executive here with us today who didn't even know that the tax credit was being passed in 2014. So how can this be, how can a solution be the responsibility of local governments that weren't involved in the first place with this? We don't see an issue. Is this truly an issue based on the numbers that I just read? Or is this a manufactured issue? Is it truly a problem? I know for a fact that if we would have been involved in 2014 with the law that was passed, we certainly would have handled our IRB situations a lot differently of how we've incentivized at the local level for distilleries to move into Marion County. And I'm going to turn it over to our judge executive to talk about some numbers that he has. So thank you again for the opportunity. Always willing to sit down and talk through solutions with you all. Thank you.
But before you go, do you have a solution?
I think our solution is we don't think there needs to be a solution.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you. I'm David Daugherty, the county judge of Marion County. I started in 2014. I'm on my second term, last year, my second term, and will be the judge for the next 4 years. Again, as Brooklyn mentioned, in 2016, Marion County done a $495 million industrial revenue bond. That was a difficult process for the folks of Marion County, the fiscal court. As the other judges can relate to you, they're not always the easiest things to make happen. A lot of people are affected by those IRBs, and the reason you do those IRBs is for the growth of your taxes in your community, in your county. All the taxing districts get a piece of that distilled spirits tax. The industrial revenue bonds abate the tax for the county, so it is definitely a welcoming thing we do for the distilleries, and something that I think in the future, if this tax is eliminated, could cause some hurdles for the bourbon business. I think it would create difficulty in going to other communities due to what are you going to get out of it? Like you say, they're not a large employer in these counties, usually 50 to 60 jobs. So, other than the bonus of the distilled spirits tax, they're difficult to justify for your community, for your counties. And I think this is looked at totally wrong, in my opinion, on the way it's being handled. It's just to eliminate something that we have recruited and tried to help bring these folks to our communities. I think it's there's something else that hasn't been mentioned, something that we do not get from distilled spirit, from distilleries, is net profit. That's something that is KRS 243 does not allow us to get that tax, which is a lot of money for the counties that we do not get. So that's something else that I haven't heard brought up, but I don't really have a solution other than we never really agreed in 2014. If we would have known that this was going to be such a hit, we would never probably have done the IRBs other than saying that. But we do appreciate our bourbon people in our county. We get along with them great. Maker's Mark is a great community member for us, and Diageo as well. But the future of Diageo was, we haven't received a dime from Diageo yet because of the delayed. That would be the only solution that I would have, instead of the put it out another year before the tax begins. That would be the only thing I could think of that would help with this.
Okay. Thank you. Couple questions. Do you have any idea how much property tax was abated
I
through your
said
IRBs?
Keiko should have. I believe.
Okay. I'm just curious. Second, in any of your contracts, and this is kind of for any of you counties, is there a requirement that the bourbon industry keep the barrels in those warehouses that were funded through the IRB for any period of time? Jerry?
Okay. The contracts that are
Get near a mic there.
Sure. Okay.
Here, sit down, Jerry.
The contracts that I'm familiar with, they're what they call a 6-turn, which is a 30-year contract, basically built for Maker's Mark, because it's a 6-year-old product. They stay in those houses the contracts are for 30 years. At the 25-year level is when they're worth the most. Then they start back on the backside because you have houses going out of it that's not, they've have expired their term limit. And to help you, Representative McCoy and Robert, the first thing of it is we did supply the numbers. I'm sorry you didn't get them from the abatement. And in our community, it's about $3.6 million a year in property tax abatement and half of the tangible tax for the barrels. We receive out of that on the existing 26 warehouses that's there already under this agreement, existing, not the 15 that's been in it, 1.7 million. So what the math is this: it's never going to really catch up until the end of the 30-year contract. You can run them out. I brought the Excel spreadsheets. I met with Mr. Petrie yesterday, or Chairman Petrie. So when you look at the contracts themselves, they're built for the community to be able to support these distilleries to stay here, because at the time, our community gave a lot to keep the world's #1 producer of bourbon and the largest bourbon producer in the world to stay in our community. And we also have Four Roses as well. Between those two distilleries, there's 32 new warehouses being built. 17 of them is 24,000 barrels. The other 15 under the IRB is 58,000 barrels. So you're looking at math here that under you talk about solutions. So if there is a sunset or whatever, the sunset's exponentially going to go up. I've had the ability and the opportunity gave to me. I have produced over 200 million gallons of bourbon. The numbers are phenomenal. I've done this. The reach that we have had has been, when you look at the recent article about some Texas bourbon, they come up and they buy Kentucky bourbon to mingle with their Texas bourbon to call it a good bourbon. So, and Robert, to help you a little bit here with this, I'm not singling you out, but all these folks I brought with me, they've been on my porch in the last year and a half because it affects every one of them. Matter of fact, we had to narrow this down. I called up here to see how many folks this room would handle today. They said 80. So we got it down to 20. And to help you, Chairman McCoy, with all this, right now we have went the extra mile as our community. We have literally no occupational tax. They pay no, when I'm going to say insurance premium surcharge, neither one of these companies, because they're self-insured. So when you look at the gift and what we have gave to them to make sure that they stay whole in our community, closing roads, fixing roads, making sure that they have the level of support to make them success, we're sort of at a myth with all this all the way around, how they could come to the table and ask for this to be gone, or some type of way to sunset it. Sunset would be okay. If you can keep us whole on, if y'all could pass a law, the Kentucky Department of Revenue can let me have how many barrels they do have so we could figure out the exact amount that they have in storage like they were in the past, this would be absolutely fantastic. So our solution is this. I have 2 fire departments here. One of them, their doors will close if this goes away. They'll be gone. So that's going to fall back on us as a county to provide fire protection for both Beam and Four Roses, each one. And I have my EMS team here, my EMA. It's all about the resources that's required to take care of millions of barrels in your community, and the manufacturing base it's limited. Like I said, I have a lot of experience in that industry. I'm sorry that you all wasn't here at the last one. I've left packets explaining this up here to you all. Our solution is, I hear what Dan's saying. I've worked with Dan in the past. I have literally some of the same background, not as lengthy, because I was manufacturing most of my career. But we're here to help work with them if there is a reasonable solution. But right now, I have our CFO and we have quite the competent staff, and we haven't been able to find a solution. They talk about corporate credits. Well, when you take a corporate credit on 1.1 million barrels a year, that's a pretty good chunk of change that I don't know if the state could afford to subsidize us with. So, and I'll be happy to answer any other questions with this or from the Kentucky Distillers Association.
Thank you, President Stivers. Question?
I guess most people know that we call Jerry and Robert our first names, so we've known each other for a long time.
Absolutely. And Robert, I have a ton of respect for what you and you're trying to accomplish here and to make things work for both sides.
I agree with that, Jerry.
Okay.
But let me ask a question about just county logistics. When you talk about solutions, if I'm not badly mistaken, each county kind of has an insurance rating based on, one, do you have a fire hydrant?
Yep.
And two, somebody that can use the fire hydrant.
Yes, sir.
So if you don't have either, you generally have like a 14 or 15 rating, which means that for most people, your homeowners or your business insurance premium is going to go through the roof.
Absolutely.
Now, when you get a fire hydrant and somebody that can use it, you'll go down to about a 6 or a 7.
Yes, sir.
And that drops your premium substantially.
Yes, sir.
So part of the solution would be to make sure you got fire protection, because that helps everybody.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And I have the command staff here from both of one of our major fire districts, Zonton, and along with Southeast, which is literally across the street. And if I may, this is not for entertainment, but this is for the seriousness of it. Can I ask the chief to stand up?
From this, I think, when we're talking about solutions,
yes, sir.
I think it's somewhat of a red herring to say we're wanting to put fire departments out of solutions. I doubt the distillers want to, because in most of the contracts, you do the, what's it called? You make sure that they're exempted from your contracts.
Yes, absolutely.
Is it postal or what?
Most of the distilleries in the past had always been in the counties, so not to affect the fire rating of the cities. And Robert, if I may, and this isn't for entertainment, if I can have the chief stand up and turn around for just a minute. This is their logo and their mantra. They're literally right across the street from Jim Beam. Chief, if you would, see what it says on there. Can you read it?
No. I'm too old.
The world's finest bourbon.
Oh.
That's been their logo and their mantra before this ever came up. So they've been great neighbors. They're there to help them and support them. And like I said, we will be happy to work with any type of solution, but we have literally turned this upside down trying to find one. And I hope that helps you, Chairman McCoy.
It does. I appreciate it. Appreciate the information. Anything else from any of you folks?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.
Mr. Chairman, just in closing, I would like to say, you've heard from the county judges today. We are open to negotiations, but negotiations is not my way or the highway. And we will work with the industry. We will work with you to find a solution to this problem. But it can't be take it or leave it. And I ask for your help, sir.
No, and I appreciate that very much. Thank you for those comments. All right, next up, look like another group that would be here. We got some folks from some sheriff's departments. if you wanted to talk, you don't have to. As I looked over it, it said didn't want to speak. So if anybody from the sheriff's got something to add or has an idea, we'd be glad to hear it. All right. If not, last group on the list is industry folks. Anybody kind of on that side that wants to get up and talk? And real quick, since I'm the chairman, I get to do anything I want. I forgot to recognize, because she's hiding behind a pole, but our incoming state rep who's going to be taking my spot, Representative Mastrone's here, and I just wanted to introduce her as well. So welcome, and sorry I missed you on the front end. If you guys would introduce yourself, and same question to you I asked everybody. I've heard all your comments. I want to hear some solutions.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. Eric Gregory, President of Kentucky Distillers Association. I am going to turn it over to Chris Nolan real quick in a minute, who's going to talk about some potential solutions, some ideas that we've had. But first, again, as everybody else has, let me thank y'all. President Stivers, Chairman McCoy, members of the committee, for having this task force to create an open dialogue so we can get to some solutions. It has been an important practice, I believe, to walk carefully through the state and local taxing structures and hear this dialogue from all parties. And we're glad to be here today and at the point of discussing common sense and potential compromise solutions with stakeholders. That's why we have been and continue to be transparent in all these discussions, and have been for 15 years. In my tenure, we've been discussing a way to address the barrel tax since 2008, because it's an issue that is discriminatory and almost singular to Kentucky, because we are the only place in the world that taxes aging barrels of spirits, and it is a tax specifically to bourbon, because we age bourbon. You don't age vodka, you don't age gin, you don't age rum, but you do age bourbon. We've openly shared our calculations and concerns, and we understand and respect that this is a tough and complicated issue for everyone involved. There are millions of dollars at stake. Barrel tax revenue has skyrocketed from less than $14 million in 2014 to $40 million this year. But one thing that we cannot afford to do, in our opinion, is not address this mounting problem. And I'm glad other stakeholders came today and are coming forward with solutions. It has become painfully clear that the barrel tax is turning away new distilleries from Kentucky and sending them to competitor states. The numbers do not lie. Distillery growth outside of Kentucky has skyrocketed. There are now 2,300 distilleries in all 50 states, and Kentucky has less than 100. This year alone, we've fallen from 11th to 12th nationally in the number of distilleries, and we're only 10 distilleries away from slipping to 14th behind Virginia and our friends in Tennessee. When you look at the rate of growth, Kentucky's in the bottom tier, ranking 29th in the rate of adding new distilleries. At one point, we had 24% of all distilleries in the United States. We now have 4%. We used to have nearly half of all the distilling jobs in the country. Now that's less than a third. Other states that we've shown are even running advertising campaigns targeting Kentucky bourbon. And this year, for the first time ever, Americans are spending more money on tequila than they are U.S.-produced whiskey. And make no mistake about this issue, the world is watching us. Just this week, I spent an hour on the phone with a journalist from Europe who was curious and a little confused as to why Kentucky taxes aging barrels when they're clearly part of the manufacturing process. As Senator Stivers pointed out, we've had some people suggest we move our barrels to other states, like the distilleries did in the 1970s, just across the border in southern Indiana, or even Tennessee, which has twice in the last decade rejected attempts to enact a barrel tax. And both those states now have more than 100 distilleries like Kentucky. So before I turn over to Chris, let me just say the warning flags are all here. Yes, we're doing well right now. But as I mentioned before, there will come a day, hopefully not in my lifetime, that this brown water is not as popular as it is today. And one thing I've heard from everybody who's spoken here before me is we need a strong bourbon industry in order to help our communities from taxes to tourism. And that is our point of emphasis, that we are trying to work to keep the bourbon industry strong and not going to other states. So we've never said take it or leave it, but we have said we are committed to working with all stakeholders to identify and resolve this barrel tax issue and growing our industry further by removing this tremendous barrier to industry. Additional distilling industry growth will generate state and local taxes and tax revenue through job creation, tourism, investment, and supply chain recruitment. And so now I'd like to turn it over to Chris Nolan, who's going to talk about some ideas.
And before you do that, I have a couple of folks with questions.
Sure.
Chairman McDaniel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if you want to let Mr. Nolan go ahead, if you want to let them get through what they're doing, and I'll just go at the end.
Okay. President Stivers, you want to wait? Representative Decker, do you want to wait and hear it all, or do you have a question?
Well, I have a question about what you just said. Thank you. I understand and have read many articles
Is your
on
mic
the
on?
fact. Yes, it is. On the fact that we have the only tax like this in the world. In the other places where there are distilleries, what is their tax structure? Is it tax-free? I mean, I'm sure, is there a property tax? Or
Property tax,
Property
but
tax.
barrels are not considered, barrel and distillate is not considered a taxable good.
Anywhere?
No, sir. No, ma'am.
Okay, so it
No, ma'am.
is just real property tax
And yes, just real property taxes.
in the other areas. And then you talked about the fact that there are 23,000 distilleries outside of Kentucky, 100 here.
2,300. I'm sorry.
2,300.
I'm sorry if I
No,
said 23,000.
No, you said 23. How many of those are bourbon distilleries?
Everybody makes that's a very good question. Most people make a clear spirit. Most people make a whiskey, whether it's bourbon or a single malt or some other ones. But bourbon right now is a very hot product. It is what is driving a lot of the spirits category right now. Well, it was until vodka and tequila came knocking our door this year.
So of the 2,300, they're all bourbon as well?
I would say most of them are making a whiskey, whether it's a brandy or a bourbon or a rye or something like that.
Do you know how many just make bourbon?
I do not.
Thank you.
No, ma'am.
Mr. Nolan, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Eric. In what we want to talk about, obviously, today is tax policy. I mean, we've heard a lot about the taxes and the tax revenue that's generated. And our discussion here, as Eric said, for at least the last 15 years, has been about the tax policy and getting the tax policy right for this Commonwealth so that the industry can continue to compete. Obviously, one option on the table would be to levy this type of property tax on all the industries in Kentucky. That would be one tax policy, but I don't think anybody wants to do that. That would not be very popular with the folks on both sides of me here representing industry. We want a good tax policy. And so one option, obviously, would be to make the tax fully refundable. We've talked about that for years. Back in 2018, when you all did tax reform, we were trying to have that conversation. And the positives, the pros of that is that it's mostly removes the barrier to entry that we've been talking about. It's relatively simple to construct and easily put together from a policy perspective. And the new revenues that our industry is expected to bring into the state coffers over the next 3 years and $3.3 billion worth of new investment would backfill a lot of that tax credit, because we expect that to generate another $60 million in revenue every year. So if you talk about eliminating $30 or $40 million in barrel taxes, or talk about making those refundable, $30 to $40 million, we're going to be dumping another $60 million into the state coffers after that 3 years of investment. So that's a return on investment. However, there are negatives to the refundability, and we certainly get that argument. Is that the right policy for the state? And in our discussions with leadership, there's been a hesitancy to go down that road, and we completely understand that. We see that as a negative towards that idea. And then you add to it that the state is refunding the taxes that are paid to a local government, makes that even more complex. So is that the best solution? I leave that for discussion, but that's a solution, Mr. Chairman, as you had mentioned, putting all the solutions on the table. potential solutions. The second one would be expanding the use of our tax credits. We are amassing tax credits that we obviously cannot monetize. And that does help our distillers. If we expand the use of that credits, it keeps our local communities whole. If those credits are expanded to other things. But the negatives to that is, how do you do it and what do you expand them to? How do you create some sort of tax credit for other taxes the bourbon industry is paying, whether that's sales taxes, occupational taxes, insurance premium taxes? The negative to that whole idea is it would be an unprecedented use of tax credits and a very complicated use of tax credits. And again, is that the good public policy to get into? Very difficult, we understand. A third option would be in eliminating the tax and allowing local entities to use some level of compensating rate for property taxes in conjunction with other state or local tools. As we've heard today, the compensating rate could be very high in some communities. We understand that. But is there a way to tweak the compensating rate to make it gradual, to extend it out, to allow for that compensating rate to happen over a period of time? Again, I don't know exactly what that would look like, but is that something worth taking a look at? The positives to that is that it would immediately remove the barriers to entry and the distillers would not be paying the tax going forward. But the negatives, obviously, would be the impact on the local communities, and that would need to be taken into some sort of account. The fourth and last option is one that's been discussed here already, which is a phased out and sunset of the tax. And we would suggest a phase out and sunset of the tax in non-IRB warehouses. We understand the IRB warehouses are a unique situation. That's a two-party contract, business contract, and we think there's ways to address that through those contracts. But that phase out begins to remove the barrier to entry as a positive and allows local entities to continue receiving revenue, but it is at a reduced rate over time. And that allows local entities to plan for the new revenue sources, for what new revenue sources they may need. But the big deal is that they're able to plan for it. And we continue to say that all this investment that's been talked about today and the investment that's yet to come does generate new revenues for all of our communities, including the state.
Chris, if I could stop you there just real quick. And that's something we do have Dr. Coombs here with us today, who has looked at how a phase out would happen and ease that transition. And actually, in the first few years of that phase out, the local communities and the state are actually going to get higher revenues back because the inventory, as it ages, is going to produce higher revenues before it starts a gradual drawdown. And then for the IRBs, I don't know if you're getting ready to address that, Chris, or not. But as I mentioned to Senator McDaniel in our last meeting, I think all our distilleries with IRBs, and there's not many, there's a handful, and it's mostly in Marion, Nelson, and Bullitt counties. I don't know about Franklin County, but I think you will find the distilleries, again, are willing partners. They are willing to sit down and discuss ways that the IRB contracts can be kept whole while those contracts are in place, because they understand that they did make commitments to those communities, and even commitments as far as pilots and other things are concerned. So that's when we talk about a phase down or a gradual wind down. We say these would be in non-IRB warehouses because we do think the IRB situation is unique. Sorry, Chris.
Just about to the end. I mean, the negatives to that type of solution is that it doesn't solve our issue immediately, and we understand that. But that's an option that we've put on the table, something we're willing to talk about, as that sounds like some local governments are willing to talk about as well. So with that, I'll wrap up. Those were kind of the four buckets. I would say that we feel like could be had discussions to see what type of solutions are on the table. And I'm happy to turn it over to some of the other.
Just for clarification, folks. I had three buckets. Give me the refundability, expand the use of tax credit, phase out non-IRB. What did I miss?
Compensating rate discussion.
Thank you.
I can
go ahead and go if that's okay. Thank you all for having me today. This is my first time appearing before this task force, and I appreciate the opportunity. I am Ashley Watts. I'm president and CEO of the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, Kentucky's largest business association. And we all know over the last couple of years, the boom of Kentucky bourbon has really obviously benefited our cities, our counties, and our state from the tens of thousands of new jobs and the billions of dollars that have been invested here by the distilling industry. And these distilleries, as you all know, have been model corporate citizens. If you think about how they stepped up when COVID-19 happened to make the hand sanitizer, when they raised money for Western Kentucky when the tornado hit, when they raised money when the flooding happened in Eastern Kentucky, and so much more. And thanks to you all as the legislature, the distilling industry has seen much success over the last couple of years. But this tax statute has truly become a deterrent for growth in one of our signature industries. And not only does this tax punish production by our existing companies, it deters new investment and job creation from startup companies. This tax creates a high barrier for entry for new distilleries, which must pay taxes for years on their aging bourbon, years before selling even the first bottle. And as a General Assembly, you all have worked hard over the last several years to help create an environment that attracts investments to this state, especially for our signature industries. Bourbon is a signature industry because it drives so many other business sectors. It fuels our farmers, our agriculture, our mills, our retailers, restaurants, and of course, tourism. So fixing this tax is more than just helping one specific industry. It helps the entire Commonwealth. Yet, unfortunately, here, our state continues to tax its homegrown industry like no other place, and we must find a solution that works for everyone. Currently, only 40 out of Kentucky's 120 counties have distilleries. The leaders in these counties, obviously many of here sitting behind us right now, recognize the vibrancy and the jobs, the supplier development, the downtown revitalization, and the tourism that these companies bring. It's imperative that these existing industries and the counties with distilleries that we remove this barrier. Kentucky has plummeted from once having 24% of all distilleries in the U.S. to now only having 4%. To remain the bourbon capital of the world, and I know we all still want that, this slide must stop. We know we are losing out on distilleries who are choosing other states to locate their facilities, with that barrel tax being a prime reason why. It is incumbent that we work together to remove this barrier for continued growth to best capitalize on bourbon's current and future popularity. And I do want to make it very clear that while we strongly support Kentucky's distilling industry and feel this tax is unfair and a hindrance for economic development, we also strongly support our local counties, our cities, our school boards, who work hard every day to make communities a place where people want to work, live, raise a family. We support their continued growth, and we also support giving them added flexibility so they can continue that growth. As Kentuckians and as a General Assembly, you all have tackled very tough issues that are complicated over the last couple of years. Issues like tax reform, fixing our unemployment insurance system, modernizing our workers' comp system, and so much more. This issue is one, though complicated, that I think working together we can all figure out, and I hope this is not a silly analogy, how to walk and chew gum at the same time. This means we can remove barriers to growth for our distillers while also supporting and growing our local communities. On behalf of all Kentucky businesses, we as a chamber commit to furthering the discussion around finding a solution and exploring the ideas that Chris just mentioned, including potentially phasing out the tax over time to allow for adjustments in tax revenue and planning by our local governments. Much like what you all did when you put forth triggers in House Bill 8 of last year to make sure that the revenue would be there. Please know, and I think you do from working with us at the Chamber, that we want to be pragmatic in this solution. And while we are discussing the tax, I do want to kind of close on what I think is the most important area the bourbon industry brings to Kentucky. Our current chair of the chamber this year is Kevin Smith with Beam Suntory, and he tells a story about former county judge executive Dean Watts in Nelson County, which, of course, it's Kentucky and everything's relative, is my husband's uncle. Judge Watts often says the best thing the bourbon industry brings to Kentucky are the jobs, and those jobs that create generational change to our communities. And I usually don't speak personally up here. I try to stick to business, but this one was so obvious I had to at least bring it to your all's attention. I can speak personally as my husband, who was raised in Bardstown, was the first in his family to graduate college. He was afforded this opportunity because of his father's job at Heaven Hill, where he recently retired with 40 years of service. Not only did my husband graduate from college, so did his brother and sister, who are now both living in Kentucky and raising families. This is what the bourbon industry brings to Kentucky: generational change and opportunity. This is the reason we all have to work together to provide a solution so that the signature industry can continue to thrive. I trust all of us that's in this room can figure out a tax solution. What we can't figure out is not having our bourbon industry and that generational change it provides in the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Frank Gemley of the Kentucky Association of Manufacturers. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thanks for all your work on this issue. I'll be brief and endorse all the remarks of my colleagues up here, including the importance of vital local government services and vital improvement in our schools. Nothing is more important to manufacturers in Kentucky than the educational system and the workforce that it produces. So for reasons of tax fairness and for economic development improvement in our state, we encourage you to eliminate the barrel tax. It is remarkable that Kentucky is the only state in the country that taxes bourbon in the barrel. And as you all know, it's difficult to overstate the impact of the bourbon industry to our state. As Ashley was just commenting on, I'm the grandson of a distiller, so this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. So we encourage you to phase it out, and we stand ready to work with you and the rest of industry and our communities to get to a solution that works for all of the above. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chairman McDaniel, want to start with questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Frank, quick question for you. You endorsed everything that the different ones said, so do you endorse the idea that maybe we tax all manufacturers' stored materials in this manner?
You know, that's a very important distinction. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for taking that one off that list.
All right, very good. Thank you. You know, guys, I've heard many times here that the tax is a deterrent. And I hear kind of the doom and gloom, but I want to share something with you. So the distilling establishments fell from 24% to 6% in the last 20 years. Share of employment fell from 43 to 30%. But the share of distilling payroll rose from 40 to 45%, due largely to the presence of high-paying professional jobs at the headquarters here. Kentucky remains the main player in terms of overall production, employment, and payroll. Where did I get that?
You got that from Dr. Coombs' economic development study
That you guys heard in January
we do every
of
2
this
years.
year.
Yes,
So let
sir.
me go on further and ask you something else. In 2012, the bourbon industry was a $2.6 billion industry.
Correct.
In 2022, it's a $4.8 billion industry, an 85% growth rate. In that same year, according to your guys' analysis, you were storing 4.9 million barrels. In 2021, you're storing 10.3 million barrels, an increase of 110% of barrel storage, while the industry as a whole only grew at 85%. So the fact that, you know, we hear in your study references a hypothesis that maybe it's a deterrent, but the fact is the data does not bear that out. So would you please describe for me why there's the difference in the rhetoric versus what the data actually shows, which is your data?
I can start, Senator. Thank you for that question. And we're seeing from the industry, we're talking to distillers. And every distiller that has located here, I won't say every, many distillers who have located here in recent years or have announced plans to, said, we looked at multiple states. And Kentucky has a regulatory environment and taxing environment that is not good for the industry, good for their decision making. They fortunately made the decision to come here, but we also know of many that did not come here because of that. You know, we have a distillery that went into Nelson County, I believe, that specifically said, I was this close to going to another state, but made the decision that I had to be in Kentucky, and that was fantastic. But we also know of 3, 4, 5, 6 examples of distilleries, massive distilleries, that are in Texas right now because they don't have the tax burden that Kentucky has. And those are ones we lost. We don't know the ones that we lost that never came and talked to us. So we don't know if that's dozens or hundreds, but we suspect, based on the anecdotal data that we have, that it is a large number.
So oh, go ahead, Eric. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. And Mr. Chairman, one of the things I would say is, yes, the distilleries are expanding right now to keep up with consumer demand. And that's why the production has increased, and that's why the barrel storage has increased. How much would it have increased, or how much could it have increased if we didn't have the barrel tax?
So, Chris, you got to something that I wanted to mention here that made the decision they had to be in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
So my mom tells this story, right? So my dad was the last draftee for Vietnam from Kentucky. So the Vietnam War ends while he's in basic training. They get sent to Germany, right? And they show up and they get there. My mom's first time out in public. And some guy says, well, where are you from? And she says, Kentucky. And he says, oh, Kentucky. Pretty women, fast horses, good whiskey. Kentucky likes our status as the bourbon capital of the world. We really do. Bourbon likes the historic nature of being in Kentucky, be it the imagery of the water or the grain or these rick houses or whatever the case is. And I think the data bears out that the executives, the corporate headquarters, like our low tax rate. And they're going to like the lower tax rate that they're fixing to get soon. And Mr. Chairman, I'll be as brief as I can with this statement. But guys, any taxation regime is about an all-inclusive package, not any individual item. You referenced the barrel, but notably absent is an extended conversation about occupational tax, property tax, insurance premium tax, and all those other things that go into not making us a taxation blip, as was described to me by a previous commissioner of revenue when we were discussing oh goodness, it escapes me now, the international taxation stuff that we dealt with the other year, that we worked with Beam directly to try to make sure that Kentucky's bourbon industry wasn't negatively affected. But Kentucky, the General Assembly did our part in 2014 with this tax credit. Bourbon's unhappy because you guys are accruing so many credits. But to the locals, with a lower rate, they wouldn't be accruing so many credits. I would argue that on the mandatory unitary combined returns, there we go, I got it. Yeah. But I would argue that this General Assembly has done more in the past decade with regulatory changes to enhance the bourbon industry than almost anything else. Be it, small batch distilleries or, local tastings or all those things that are important to that industry. To the locals, I would argue you think you have a great relationship. You did in the past, and I hope you do in the future. But right now, the reason you liked bourbon and the reason you wanted them is because you viewed this bourbon tax, the barrel tax, as beneficial to your community. The industry doesn't want that, or they want some change to it. To the industry, you think you get along with locals, but the one tie that binds more than anything, you don't want to deal with anymore. But I also think to the industry folks, you represented to the locals when you moved to their communities the benefits of this barrel tax. And you have not just an economic, but a moral obligation to the commitment that you made to those folks. To the locals, I would say, if you want to keep the bourbon industry, you got to work with them on what this taxation structure looks like. I would argue to both sides, as I have before, the general fund is not your salvation. Hoping that the SEEK formula will increase, because remember, SEEK is a pie, and there's an overall dollar figure we budget to. And if we budget to that dollar figure, bourbon school districts, yes, you go up, but necessarily the other schools' district's local effort will then look disproportionately higher, and their potential share of that pie will go down. So the general fund, SEEK formula, these are not the salvation for this. So to locals, I would argue to you, work with them on this tax policy, or your neighboring counties might. To the industry, I would argue to you, if you don't honor those moral and implicit obligations, don't necessarily expect such a cooperative General Assembly over the next decade as we advance. Mr. Chairman, to your admonition that is so wisely made we should come with solutions. And the solution is one that we implemented at the state level a decade ago. This is a local conversation, and you guys need to be having it. And don't count on the General Assembly or the other taxpayers of the Commonwealth to get involved in this local versus industry dispute. Thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. President Stivers?
This is somewhat on the same lines as Senator McDaniel. I'm going to ask first of all, somebody tell me how many new rick houses are projected to be built in the next 5 years?
Mm-hmm.
That's an answer I probably don't have. I mean, I know some distilleries are building 1 to 2 a year in anticipation of the market continuing to go up as of right now.
Okay. I just came from Heaven Hill, and I think they're projecting. They just built 2, and they're building 2 more.
Right.
About $5 million per rick house, and I think theirs are some of the smaller rick houses.
I think it's probably in the 40 to 50,000 barrel range, but I'd have to double check with them on
Okay. Along the lines of Senator McDaniel, when you're sitting here, and I'm not sure what was meant in Marion County that they did an IRB in 16 when the ad valorem tax credit was passed in 14, how that impacted that, because it was out on the table. But starting in around 14, you all, and 15, because of a couple of things we did here, you all have seen a mass upward trajectory in investment, job growth, taxes paid due to sales. Now, you look at these county judges and everybody else, how do you square that to say this industry is being hurt by the current taxing structure?
I think you look at it from a competitive standpoint. Again, we have distilleries right now that are in mass going to other states. They're not coming to Kentucky in the rate that they are other states right now. And if we want to continue that growth, if we want to continue that investment, if we want to continue, even if we got 10% of the 2,200 distilleries that are located outside Kentucky, we'd be in the top 5. So, yes, sir, you're exactly correct. We're doing well right now. And we are doing well because we are home, thankfully, to some of the biggest distilling companies in not only the country and the world. But if some of these other distilleries in the other states start to take hold and they become the next Maker's Mark or they become the next Heaven Hill, then suddenly that volume that we're producing here in Kentucky, being the home of 95% of the world's bourbon, slips to 90% or 85%. And at that point, we've lost not only image and identity, but also investment, jobs, status, you name it.
And the average consumer sees a bottle of bourbon on a shelf, they think it's all from Kentucky. And they don't differentiate between what's made in Kentucky and what's not made in Kentucky for the most part. And so as we forecast and we're looking at trends in our industry, which is the reason the Kentucky Distillers Association embarked on a campaign within this last year to try to brand bourbon as Kentucky bourbon. More, as Eric said, more and more of those distilleries will say, you know, I don't have to be in Kentucky to make bourbon. And now only 80% of the world's bourbon is made in Kentucky, so I can pop my brand up in Indiana or Tennessee or Texas and not have that stigma, because most consumers think, oh, it's bourbon, it's good bourbon, it's probably from Kentucky. So we're looking ahead to try to eliminate those barriers so that folks more freely come to Kentucky and want to say, oh, yeah, if I'm making a bourbon, I better be in Kentucky, which is what happened to several of our distilleries that are now large distilleries. They made the decision 10 years ago, I got a better deal in Pennsylvania, which was one of them, but if I'm making bourbon, I really need to be in Kentucky.
Let me, in any solution, if there is one, and the reason I asked that question first was maybe the solution is doing nothing. That's a solution.
Mm-hmm.
But if there is a solution different than doing nothing, how do I look at the Henry County judge, back to Senator McDaniel's question, that, where's the Henry County judge? What was Angel's Envy?
Yes, sir.
negotiated knowing what the taxes were and went to Henry County and entered into a deal with them to build, which I think they're getting. I'm not sure who's attacking them, probably not the judge, but some other people in Henry County are hitting them pretty hard right now. You know, I don't know if I'd really go there but what do you say to the Henry County judge in any type of situation where one of your members went there knowing what the landscape was and entered into the deal they entered into?
No, I think that is a fair point. And I guess I would say when you're looking at the deal as it is on a current day, yes, this is what they expect as they're forecasting down the road. But I don't think anybody in this room can sit here and tell us what it's be like in 2035.
I think it's a valid point.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at 12 years ago from where we are right now, we would never dreamed that we'd be in the success mode that we're in right now. Okay. But at the same time, this is an industry that is driven or has external pressures that we can't control, tariffs, COVID, anything like that. We have market pressures like tequila and other spirits. We're changing consumer tastes like we had in the 70s. If for some reason that the new generation decides that bourbon is your dad's drink or worse, your grandfather's drink, and starts drinking gin, as some of the younger people I know who are drinking gin, which I don't understand, you know, if those start to change, then yes, suddenly 12 years from now, that revenue may not be there. And I guess that's one of the things we're trying to say is we don't want to be in a situation where another downturn in the bourbon industry through competition or changing consumer taste or any of these things has an effect on schools, fire districts, community budgets. That's why we're bringing this up right now. The barrel tax is growing at such a phenomenal rate because the barrels have been growing at such a phenomenal rate in good times right now. But if that starts to trickle down or trickle off, what are these communities going to do to replace that revenue?
Well, and I'm going to say this. I would say that if anybody understands what the loss of an industry means, like I do, is probably the Henry County judge, because they lost the tobacco industry. And there will be good days and bad days, and the industry may leave. And that's why I'm interested in knowing this. And I've asked you some pretty tough questions. I want to know, how do you sell it? Man, it's tough to sell when you're showing those types of returns, to say, look, we want to do something different. But I do understand creating an economic dynamic, because you can be like the coal industry or tobacco industry. 40 years ago, nobody thought the small tobacco farm was ever going to go out of business, but it did. And I will say this somewhat like Senator McDaniel, to those individuals in Marion County, I actually know of a few counties that are not too far away from you that are making overtures to take some of your all's business. And I know in my area, we would love to have a rick house. You know, and somebody said, well, it might be a crumb. Well, when you've not had any cake in a long time, a crumb looks like the whole slice. And so I know the competition is out there, and there has to be some response. But it's hard to sell that there's a need for a response when you have this type of trajectory in your growth and sales.
Senator, if I can respond to that question earlier, just a second. When you have somebody like Angel's Envy in Henry County, they are Kentucky-based. They came here before bourbon boom got started. They had their location in Louisville, and they've had the need to expand. They're looking at their projections, trying to meet consumer demand. They're like, we have to expand. We need more bourbon warehouses. We can't put them in downtown Louisville. So when they started looking for a place to go, they found Henry County. They didn't go to Henry County and say, we'll give you money. They said, we've got to expand. Would you have us in Henry County? But part of that deal is that the state statutes require that we pay the taxes. So no matter where we went, the state statutes require we pay the community these taxes. It wasn't necessarily the deal we cut was we'll pay you taxes if we come to your community. It was the taxes are required. Now, how can we structure something that's beneficial to them? No matter where they went, they would have structured a deal. And in this case, it was not IRBs based on the previous discussion, but it was just land. And so that was the agreement. But they had to make that agreement because the state statutes require the taxation. and we would honor all those agreements, and we think the IRBs can be adjusted for those agreements that were made.
Representative Huff.
I've heard a lot about Texas bourbon in these meetings, and I never tried it. So last night I decided I'm going to go buy me a bottle of Texas bourbon. And I am a big fan of Kentucky bourbon, by the way. I've got a pretty good collection. Never entered my mind to buy any from anywhere else. Anyway, I went to the liquor store and I said, "Do you have Texas bourbon?" He said, "I sure do." I said, "How much is a bottle of this?" And he said, $117. And I thought, well, he said, "Here, I'll let you try it first." He got two different ones out. Both of them tasted like kerosene. There's no comparison. There's no comparison. You could pour half a bottle of Jim Beam in there, it wouldn't help it. It was awful. So I just wanted to point out that you can write bourbon on anything you want to write it on. But you can't make good bourbon in Texas. I learned that.
Well,
and I'm glad I didn't spend $117 on the bottle. It's lighter fluid. I mean, you know.
Chris mentioned our marketing campaign, and it's called "The Proof Is Here." Again, so we would love for you to create a testimonial for us that Texas bourbon doesn't stand up to Kentucky bourbon. Yes,
it might be good to pour in your lighter or something, but it's not good to drink. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Decker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to draw some conclusions from all that I'm hearing. Want to make sure I understand clearly what I've heard. From what you said in answer to a question I had earlier about other states and what are their tax structures, they are having property tax, absent barrels. So I conclude that is, you say it's more advantageous, so some people are going there. So that overall tax structure creates less tax revenue for those states than our barrel tax does here.
Well, I don't think they've ever expected that revenue because they've never had barrels to tax, but now they now they do. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. But their tax structure results in less tax that you have to pay as an industry.
Because we have a tax on barrels in the distiller considered property. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And we've asked the counties and to tell us what they have lost in property tax so that we can look at. What about the industry? You know that, right? Or do you know that? Can you present that, what the industry has saved
we can certainly
in not
ask.
Having property
we
tax?
can certainly ask, but I would also say that I think, and Dr. Coombs may have some of these numbers, that when you have property and you add a rick house or a warehouse to it, the property value goes up. Correct, Dr. Coombs? Do you want to address that, sir? Well, no, you're the expert. I'll let you. There, Paul.
Okay, thanks. Yes, so we do track the amount of real estate property taxes and tangible property taxes that the industry pays by jurisdiction by year. We've been doing this for 13, 14 years. And so independent of the barrel tax, okay?
Yes.
So I put this table together last night. So in 2013, real estate taxes paid by the industry, $2.2 million. In 2020, $6.6 million. So triple in the last 7 years the amount of real estate taxes paid by the distilleries. Tangible in 2013, $1.4 million. In 2020, $3.8 million. So that's about 2.5 times increase. So as the investments are made, yes, you get the barrels to tax, but you also get the buildings and the equipment, the visitor centers, the hospitality centers, et cetera. So it's a growth of, in terms of real estate, in the last 7 years, $4.4 million, tangible, $2.4 million, aging barrel, $16.1 million. So the barrel taxes are growing at a faster rate than the real estate taxes. If I may add one other thing, because people keep talking about how it's done in other states. And you've asked that twice, and that's a great question. What you'll find if you look at public finance arrangements around the United States, Kentucky is very low in its reliance on property taxes, real estate property taxes. We're in the bottom 10 of states for local governments' dependence upon real estate property taxes. Kentucky has very low tax rates. And this leads me to a logical conclusion, given the school boards talk about hitting the 4% cap and having to lower the rates every year. We've created that with House Bill 44, the 4% cap on the growth in property tax rates, and that keeps Kentucky's property tax rates extremely low. So this is one thing that you could look at. This is not their policy. This is just Coombs, professor, listening to everybody and playing back what I hear. And having looked at this for 30 or 40 years, the school system could rely more on local real estate property taxes if you remove that 4% cap every year. And then they wouldn't be as addicted to the aging barrel taxes.
Just want to, yes, thank you. So that when you talk about the property taxes, and those are large numbers, but they are obviously where there are no IRBs. Is that what we're talking about? Where there are no they've not been excused from that?
Correct. That would be outside the IRBs that are not paying the property taxes and instead are.
Okay. So then, as I understood Judge Summers, and I hope I understood correctly, if you computed and you know what the property tax would have been without the IRBs, I understood that it would have been higher than what you received in the barrel tax. Is that what I understood?
In the IRB, the abatement
yes.
on the property and the other half of the tangible is about 3 times the value of the other half of the tangible tax on the liquid itself. Does that help you over a period of time when you take the 3-point-something million a year in property tax abatement, which includes tangible?
Yes.
You can do the math. Times literally figures out to be 27 and a half years on the whole, based off of because on the tangible side, for the first 2 years, there's no tangible tax on the liquid in the barrel. So that's not included throughout the entire scope of the IRB on literally on what is now 15 warehouses and 58,000 numbers. We presented our property tax rates and revenue from, and Justin just walked out the door. Property tax just from Four Roses and Jim Beam.
It does. It does. Thank you.
Sir, we need you to come to a microphone if you're going to make a comment, and we need to hurry up. I'm not going to let this get out of control. We ask people who want to speak to sign up. State your name for the record.
My name is Dave Jurgens. I'm chairman of the Southeast Bullitt Taxing District. I was on the fire department in 1979 when it was formed. I'm a retired elevator constructor. I've worked in many of the facilities over the years. I remember the lean years to where there was really nothing produced in the early 70s and 80s. My point is, in 2016, Beams was granted, I'm not sure all these, they're not paying taxes on 11 warehouses in Bullitt County. And we just discovered that about 3 months ago, our tax revenue on property was staying flat. Shepherdsville has taken our land to put all the warehouses in. Southeast Bullitt does not get that revenue on those warehouses. To Mr. Stiver's comment about the ISO ratings, our ISO rating is a 4. In early 1980, Mr. Summers' father approached, as a Beam employee, approached Southeast Bullitt, we need you to build a firehouse close to the distillery. They gave us $9,000. We built the firehouse. In that day, we bought a used fire truck from the city of Louisville for $3,300. We just ordered 2 trucks that'll take a year and a quarter to get here at $1.5 million. Again, back in the day, we would go to Louisville and get their hand-me-down turnout gear. In today's world, turnout gear, boots, pants, coat, gloves, Nomex hood, helmet, and air pack, somewhere around $12,000 per person. There's 4 guys that run out of the firehouse in a $750,000 million truck up to respond to beams. Our firehouse is a mile from it. So in 2016, I don't go to all fiscal court meetings. I missed the part that Beams was granted a deal on the taxes. So again, our tax base on you all use different phrases. My tax bill is distilled spirits tax. I've been told that there's the land, there's the building, and there's the barrel and the distilled spirits. When on December 31st, when there's a magical night, you all press a button and it tells the state where every ounce of bourbon that you own is located. And that prints out something to us. You all send us a check in April. But the point is, we are given $350,000 in distilled spirits tax. We get that sometime in February or April. That is over a third of our budget to operate the fire department. Now, in the past, there's been things that's been done, wasn't the best thing in the world. I volunteer for a lot of things. You haven't lived till you volunteer to be on a zoning board. I mean, don't ever do that. I've been on the fire department. I collect the taxes. I'm past potentate of Cosair. So to your first question was, what can we do different? When I travel around the country for Shriners, the cities will give you all kinds of tourism dollars. I hosted a party at Myrtle Beach last year for 1,500 Shriners. I won't say publicly what Myrtle Beach gave us to come back the next year, but let's look at tourism dollars to figure out a way to attract people. I don't know how many thousands of cars run up and down I-65, but I lay in bed at night and I can hear them from my farm. But my point is, in tourism, you have to come to Bullitt County at the first exit to buy diesel fuel for a semi. Why doesn't the state have something? I'm just using this as a point. I mean, you're in South Bullitt County before you come to a rest area. So if you bring, when I was on the tourism board, if you bring X amount of people, they'll give you a percentage because they figure you're going to stay a night or two, eat this, do that. So again, as a state, what can we do to make it easier for people to come here and go see these bourbon warehouses? I've worked in them. Into a little past history of the elevator business, I used to maintain the elevators in this building and a lot of them in Frankfurt over the years. But when I was driving up here, I used to see dozens of tour buses going to Bardstown. I had lunch in Bardstown yesterday and I didn't see a tour bus anywhere. So my point is, things will change in tourism. In 1972, I worked in a distillery on 18th Street that had hundreds of people bottling. In 1980, I was paid by that distillery to maintain the elevators, that the last person to ride the elevator was me 3 months previous because they were closed up. So again, it all changes. There's a lot of history, but we didn't just get here. We can't fix it today. And how can we go about this for everybody to come out on a winning side? So again, school boards and counties, but there's not that many fire departments that rely so much on it. So I appreciate you allowing me to speak.
Thank you for your comments. And you stumbled unwittingly, or maybe not unwittingly, into a constitutional quagmire that needs to be solved as well. All right. Well, I think that's it for today. Thank you all very, very much. The next meeting, if there is one, is President Stiver's meeting. So stay tuned. Thank you all. We're adjourned.